What's up, family? And welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to have a conversation about the Black church and about the Black church taking accountability and what that could possibly mean. This conversation was inspired by a post that I did on Facebook a few days ago, and I'm kind of excited to jump into this a little bit. So before we do, you already kind of know the routine. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, consider joining our community, consider volunteering in our community, consider financially supporting the work that we're doing, and of course, check out the merch because it is some of the dopest on the planet. And, it's just our way of trying to empower with style. I like that. I do. Okay, so let's jump into this. First, let me kind of give you some context here. I put a post on my Facebook a few days ago that says, the Black church has a long list of wasted lives that it should be held accountable for. Too many people in our communities are stuck and powerless because the preacher told them only God could do what a God has never done. This has to stop. So that was my post. And to be honest, I do not post a lot on Facebook. Social media rant here for me. Social media for me has just kind of become like a wasteland, like a garbage heap. And I felt this way since 2017. And that's actually when I first started learning how to program. And I actually started working on a different type of social media app to kind of bring some intention to it, because right now, again, like I said, it's like a wasteland, just wandering savages and stuff, like Furiosa, it's ugly out here. It's Mad Max, So I say all of that to say I don't really engage Facebook a lot. I don't engage Instagram a lot. I just now started engaging TikTok, sharing more content on there. And that's really just been after the encouragement of other creators to get on there. Honestly, I think I may be in my old man phase where it's like, hey, young kids, get the fuck off my property. Because much of what's on social media just itches me the wrong way. I'm not a big fan of memes. Like, I get it, but with all of the superstitious thinking and the lack of critical thinking that we have, I just don't know if we can responsibly handle memes as a society yet, But so let's kind of continue. Let's kind of continue. For some random reason, I just flashed my lighter at you, but hey. So I did have someone actually respond to that with which what I felt was a good faith question, and so this is actually what stoked this conversation. And random non-aligned question: what specifically is the Black church? That one I'm going to have some fun with. And how does one hold it accountable? Asked in good faith, as this subset of Christianity is much less well known to me than others, and because I am curious about what would satisfy your desire for accounting. Probably a good video topic as well, as I suspect there is a lot here worth going over. And I know you have dealt with some of this before, but at least I would find the extra detail useful or interesting. Now, I'm typically quite averse to taking requests, just because I'm not a DJ. But every now and then I do come across something where I say, that actually is a good conversation, because the questions that this was Michael, the questions that Michael posed here are questions that exist in the populace, in the zeitgeist, if you will. These are popular questions. These are questions that are dealt with on a consistent basis. So it is worth diving into, and so I will. So we'll just kind of break this down a little bit, starting with the first question is, what specifically is the Black church? Now, to me, the answer to this question seems obvious, and it always has. If I said the Black community, would anyone be confused? If I said the Black vote, would anyone be confused? What if I said the Black billionaire class? The definition is literally in the term. The root of the question seems to be the presupposition of assertion of uniformity, which is not necessarily present in the statement. Shared identity is the inference, not uniformity. So when someone says the black church, they're talking about black churches. So when you hear someone say the black community, they're talking about communities that are majority black. Not saying that all of these communities are exactly the same. Not saying that all of these churches are exactly the same, but you are instead just saying that they have a shared identity. Adding the article and dropping the plural does not infer a monolith in the same way that saying the United States of America doesn't make the US a monolith. We say the US, but we don't say, oh, but all United States citizens aren't the same. But I do notice that's the game that kind of gets played anytime you say the black anything. It's like, well, black people aren't a monolith. Name one group of people that are a monolith. That seems to be a non-starter. And again, I don't think that's where Michael was going with this, but it's such a popular notion that I thought I'd address this in this sense. So literally, um, there, there's nothing, there's no rocket science about this. What is the black church? The black church is the collection of churches that are either majority black or identify as black, which will typically be majority black churches, because a phenomenon that I have highlighted before, not in these videos, but when I was participating in another channel, is a phenomenon is that black Christians will follow white Christians as leaders, but typically white Christians will not follow black Christians as leaders. And this is something that is statistically observational, which means it's so statistically sound that you can observe it. You can find, just go out and find all churches that have a really healthy mixed congregation, and almost all of them will be led by a white pastor. Black pastors got hearts for other people too, but when it comes to the Christian world, it's just something about seeing black people as leaders it's just yikes. It's scary. Seeing black people or women as leaders is just oof. We went through that with Barack and Hillary. You saw how uncomfortable Christians got really, really quickly. But anyway, so the black church, it's black churches. No great surprise there. All right. So moving on to the next question, or the next part of the question is, how do you hold it accountable? I want to answer this one in a few ways. Okay. So the first one is the same way a people hold its government accountable. Accountability is best served from within. To me, these things are not great mysteries. So I don't, and I don't know if I'm just being hard on myself, but or just, no, not hard on myself. I don't know if I'm taking for granted how smart I really am, which I don't think I am. I don't understand how these things are mysterious to people. How do you hold anything accountable? You know, how do students hold their faculty accountable? You do so by doing so. And, so in simple terms, you hold it accountable by taking an inventory of damage done, if there is any, and you change the messaging to mitigate the damage, and you reject leaders who won't change. And then the church has the simplest way of doing that. Once you realize that the institution that you're a part of is not aligning with the goals that it claims to exist for, or even that the outcomes that it promises, that those outcomes are not coming, then you can disalign yourself with it. Even churches that don't vote. You know how? With their money and with their feet. You can stop giving and you can stop showing up. That's how you would hold it accountable. You force the messaging to change by becoming accountable yourself and saying, I want a healthy message. I want to hear something that's actually going to help me, that's actually going to move me forward. It is amazing to me because this doesn't seem to be an issue that's just isolated to church. It seems to me that the American populace has completely forgotten how to hold itself accountable. We've become so good at pointing out villains that we have not been able to say, damn, I can solve my own problems. And much of our problems we can. This is why I don't jump on the bandwagon of saying, hey, preachers are out here scamming folk. I don't say that. Now, I do know that there are some preachers who are doing that. But by far and large, everybody who's showing up is participating in the fucking scam. This is all voluntary. Nobody's being held at gunpoint. The people in the pews are no less innocent than the people in the pulpit. They are of the same cloth. Hello. And the truth of the matter is, the messaging is controlled from the pews, not from the pulpit. This is something that I stress quite a bit, but government is always at the will of the consent. It's not a political doctrine, it's a social reality. You want things to change, you change it. You don't sit back and just say, oh, how bad things are. You become a part of the change. See, I think this is one of the things that does make me a little different, is that a part of my deconversion was not coming to this place where I blamed religion for all of my problems. I blamed me for falling for it, you know. And I don't even say blame. I actually kind of separate myself from the concept of blame. Blame is just kind of useless to me. Yes, I can blame you. What happens next? Yeah, I can say it's your fault. What happens next? But the moment I say it's my responsibility not to get fooled by people like you, then I actually have things that I can do. As long as the blame stays on somebody else, or as long as it's somebody else's fault, then I am always out of agency. There's nothing I can do about that. So when a part of my deconstruction and deconversion process was realizing, like most people say, well, religion is harmful. Religion is harmful. My thing was, it's a poor carpenter who blames its tools for its work. So no, I don't blame religion for the problems of people, nor do I blame politics for the problems of people. I blame people, or I hold people responsible. Better way of saying it is holding each other accountable, And so no, accountability is a lot easier than we make it sound, But the problem is most people don't even know they have that right, which again speaks to an education issue in this country. So, yep, take inventory, which that's what any organization should be doing. Every organization, whether it's the church or anything else, if you're existing, then it should be your job to inspect what you expect. Okay, all right, I'm about to go corporate me, and y'all don't want that guy right now. Y'all don't want that guy. So let's stay on track. So, how do you hold it accountable? It's not a monolith. Notice that the Black church is conveniently not a monolith when it's critiqued. That's kind of how everything goes. Anytime I hear somebody saying, oh, we're not a monolith, it's always in the it's always in the sense of critique. You say all Black people can dance. Nobody says, oh, that we're not a monolith. But you say something negative, then it's not a monolith. But see, the thing is, it's not just true when negative things are said. It's true when positive things are said too, which ultimately means the statement itself is absolutely irrelevant. Whether it's a monolith or not has nothing to do with anything. We don't just critique monoliths. Hello. But let's examine further the claims that it has of itself, such as the Black church is the pillar of the Black community, or that it has been the proactive center of civil rights. How are these not monolithic attributes without requirement for investigation into the individual activity and impact of Black churches on Black communities? And if for nothing else, we should be able to hold it accountable to the efficacy of its own claims. And if we should be diligent enough to, and we should be diligent enough to interrogate those claims at all relevant levels, local, regional, and otherwise. I could highlight here that when we do interrogate the history of the Black church and issues of social justice, we will find that a small minority have been conflated into the vast majority. While the reality is the majority of the Black church has been silent and like literally downright hesitant to getting involved because it is a cowardice institution and has always been so. Hiding behind the cross. I'd encourage you to look into why Dr. King was being threatened to being kicked out of his own convention. I'd encourage you to actually interrogate the physical altercation that took place to literally keep him from taking a leadership position in that religious convention because of the work of social justice he was doing. The civil rights movement was led by the black youth, not the black church. Certain black preachers and black politicians, and I shouldn't even have to say their names for you to know which ones I'm talking about there, co-opted that movement after King died from the hands of free thinkers like Stokely Carmichael, Bayard Rustin, A. Philip Randolph, Huey Newton, John G. Jackson, and people like John Henrik Clark, all who were non-believers who did not get their credit. And I could go on. This is the short version of the list. But I want to shift this conversation from the politics and the propaganda of the black church to the messaging of the black church, which is what my post talked about. See, it's always the details. It's the details. Hoy. I want to highlight some of the messaging of the black church and the psychological and sociological damage that it does to its adherents, which again, I'm going to scroll this back up just so I can take you back to where my post stood at. The black church has a long list of wasted lives that it should be held accountable for. So now that I've kind of went the long way around, what are we saying here? Let's get to the specifics. That there is a long list of wasted lives that it should be held accountable for. How would you hold it accountable? You take inventory of the long list of wasted lives. And then you'd call into question the church's messaging and whether or not this messaging was harmful or helpful. All right? I go on to say that too many people in our communities are stuck and powerless. How can you hold the church accountable? You can examine the efficacy of my claim. I'm not saying you have to accept my claim as the gospel truth. I'd encourage you not to do that. This is one of the reasons why I am kind of against sharing sources and things of that nature on a YouTube channel, because this is not a peer-reviewed essay or report or research. And no, even if it was, you shouldn't just be like, oh, well, he cited the sources, so he must be telling the truth. No, that's not the purpose of citing the sources. The purpose of citing the sources is so you can read them yourselves and determine if you agree with the sources. Now, the good news is you no longer live in 1835, so you can hear anything that I'm saying and Google it and find your own fucking sources, which is the responsible thing to do. Okay, sorry. I am passionate about education. And I don't like the fact that we're just taking all of these shortcuts because we think because we think that it is easier, because it is robbing people of what responsible knowing is. So we live like literally surrounded by people who should know how to know, but do not know how to know because we use words like trust me way too often. No, I do not want you to trust me. You should not trust me. You should verify every fucking word that I say. All right. Okay. And so I go on to say too many people in our communities are stuck and powerless because the preacher told them only God could do. Like, I am pretty specific in my posts, like, because I think about these things. It's not just, like, oh, let me see if I can stir the pot. These are things that I've been reflecting on for a very long time. These are things that led to my deconversion. So what is the thing that I'm asking them to be held accountable to? Wasted lives, people in our communities who are stuck and powerless. Why? Because the preacher told them that there were things in their lives that only God could do, that a God has never done. I don't know how I could be more specific than that, but I'm going to try. So, talking about the messaging, I want to highlight a few counterproductive sayings, ideologies, and beliefs that are extremely popular in the black church. And they're likely popular in other churches too, because much of the urban church has stolen its swag from the black church. Now, this is just the truth. You cannot deny that. You cannot deny it. Now, let me stop. All right, so here's the first one. He's an on-time God. It's based off of an old song by Dottie Peebles. All of the old women in my life love this song. He's an on-time God. Yes, he is. Oh, on time God. Like, you can hear the sadness in the song. You can hear that the people singing the song don't believe the shit that they're saying. But no, we say one of the big parts of the song is, he may not come when you want him, but he'll be there right on time. I tell you, he's an on time God. Yeah, yes, he is. I didn't realize I was going to have as much fun with that as I did. It is a little fun little song. But I want you to hear that. The first thing that you realize is that, oh, I want to make a joke. I'm going to do it. I'm black. I can make this joke. This is why you have CP time right here. This is exactly why you have CP time, because this just demonstrates that we don't know what the fuck on time is. He may not come when you want him, but he'll be there right on time. See, if God can be late, we can be late. This is why you have CP time. Okay, that was my little joke. But back to all seriousness. Back to all seriousness. He's an on-time God. The big issue here is, because I wanted to highlight the counterproductivity of these things, is that this robs you of the ability to measure your life accurately. You know? Because now you're saying, you can't even engage your relationship with God accurately. So now, if you believe that God was going to do something and God did not do something, then, well, you know what? He may not come when I want him, but he's always right on time, which apparently is never. His time is never. For those of you who've not got it yet, God's timing is never. All right. But yes, he's an on-time God. He may not come when you want him. This creates a type of dissonance and a type of disassociation in a person that creates an inability to measure their own life properly, to measure whether they're making progress or not, because now they have to lie about the progress. I may not be where I want to be, but thank God I'm not where I used to be. Well, that's not how you measure progress, sweetheart. That's not how you measure hitting the goal. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The next one is, don't try to figure it out. I should not have to tell you how harmful that is. But this is a very popular message in the black church. Why are you trying to figure it out when God has already worked it out? And literally, if you at any moment, especially if you're heavily involved in these urban black churches that are charismatic, if you even start evidencing that you're trying to figure things out, that you're trying to figure out how to move your life forward, that you're trying to figure out what you can do, at that moment, you're going to be told that you're trying to do God's job, and that's not going to work out for you. You're not supposed to try to figure it out. You understand? Now, understand that is absolutely unbiblical, because there's nothing in the Bible that encourages anybody not to try to figure it out. There is something in the Bible that does encourage David not to do a census, which I guess that can be put in that. Well, so it is kind of biblical. All right. Can't say it's not biblical, but it's still stupid. Okay. Maybe biblical, still stupid to teach people not to try to figure out how to navigate in life. What it results in is an overwhelming amount of people who can't figure out how to navigate through life. They don't understand why life is so hard. They can't comprehend why things keep going wrong, because in their mind, they're not supposed to be trying to figure it out. God is supposed to just be working it out. So the only thing they're trying to figure out is why God isn't on their side. Moving on. God fights my battles. Hello. Whole black community, with God fighting your battles, how has that been going? Yeah. Yeah. I thought about that. Listen, God hasn't done a good job of fighting Israel's battles, and he apparently considers them his favorite. So don't get in God's way. That goes back to the don't try to figure it out. God fights my battles. And then is even inculcated in this idea of he's on time. If you're losing, it's just because God wants you to get something out of this. And to be clear, I do believe that there's incredible lessons that you can get out of losing if you're paying attention and trying to figure it out. But if you're not trying to figure it out, if you're not trying to pay attention, if you believe that God is fighting your battles and you're not getting in the ring, then you don't know when to zig and when to zag. Going back to that old Mario illustration, like if you're just using the cheat codes, then you actually don't build up the muscle to actually beat the later stages. This is crippling, especially to a community that has the issues mine does. And I'm unapologetic about this. I will not get on my platform and try to air all of my community's dirty laundry, but I will say for sure that one of the things that led to my deconversion was realizing that I was a part of a community in crisis and that the church was absolutely a part of it, helping to exasperate this crisis with messaging such as this. Only what God ordains will succeed. Only what you do for Christ will last. Only what you do for Christ will stand. Very popular sayings, very popular messaging across the pulpit. And it sounds harmless if you are a part of a people group who has an economic foundation and does not live in a country where you are treated as a second-class citizen. But when you are a part of that people group, you do not have the luxury of fairy tales. You do not have the luxury of imagining that there's a superhero out there that is fighting your battles, and that if you would sacrifice paying attention to building your own life and build his kingdom instead, your life will be taken care of. This is how you create generational poverty outside of the obvious capitalistic implications as well. I always like to highlight that out there for my socialist and communist friends out there. Undeserved favor. Oh man, this is, which I think I've highlighted this one before. It was Bishop Jakes who popularized this with this idea of favor ain't fair. Now, this should highlight the pseudo intelligence of the black church, and this is one of the things that aggravates the hell out of me. It's one of the reasons, as much as I love Oprah, and I do, she has been just as harmful as the black church has been by platforming foolishness over and over again. And I love Oprah. Oprah, I love you, but you've platformed a lot of foolishness by just platforming stuff that sounds right and feels right, but ain't quite right, because you cannot preach that favor isn't fair while preaching that God is. If favor isn't fair, you're also insinuating that God isn't fair. And therefore, if you're okay with God not being fair, then how can you be how can you ask for equality? How can you ask for diversity? How can you ask for inclusion? You are sticking your foot in your own fucking mouth and doing harm. Favor ain't fair? What? This makes no sense. But the truth of the matter is, it's accurate. Favor isn't fair. It's favoritism. And the Bible says God shows no favor of persons. So what's going on with the preachers? I don't. But this idea of undeserved favor, that God is going to make things happen in my life that I didn't work to make happen in my life. And the real disingenuousness of this is the preachers who are preaching that are people who are absolutely doing the work to make things happen in their life. You know what I'm saying? They're out there navigating while telling other people it's just faith. It's just favor. It's just undeserved favor. But you see how that tracks with don't try to figure it out. Don't try to figure it out because ain't nothing you can do to deserve it anyway. Boy, too smart for your own good. This is a very popular ideology in the black church, that you can be too smart for your own good. In other words, that you can get so smart that you stop seeing God. Oh, how I wish we would. That you can get so smart that you stop trusting the things that we say. You start questioning it a little too much. Now you're too smart for your own good. And the last little saying I want to hit here before moving on is, you won't have to do anything to make it happen. This is a very popular prophecy in the black church. By this time next year, I hear the Spirit of the Lord speaking expressly in these times. This word is for somebody in here, that by this time next year, you're going to have an entirely new house, an entirely new job. You're going to be making six figures. And here's the good news. You won't have to do anything to make it happen. This will be undeserved favor. Don't you try to figure it out. God is already working that thing out on your behalf. This type of buffoonery is damaging if people actually believe it. You know, in a community that does not have an economic floor. See, let me show you the difference between communities that have an economic floor and communities that don't. There are communities that do have economic floors that participate in the same buffoonery. They participate in the exact same. Colleges do this same type of stuff, believe it or not. That's why I always find it funny when people talk about the money lines in churches. I'm like, I guess you've never been to charity events before, because universities do these, political campaigns do these. The only difference is they're typically not aimed at poor people, right? I was going somewhere else with that. But anyway, but you have no idea how many people are terrified of making decisions to better their own lives because they're afraid that they're going to be getting in God's way, and they're going to be somehow stopping God from working out this miraculous blessing that God has never worked out. I mean, that should make it pretty clear of how this is damaging. You know, one of the ways we can hold it accountable is we can stop pretending that the church is doing good unless we've investigated it. And I will call the atheist community out on this. It's your fault that I stayed a Christian for as long as I did. It's your fault. This is why I am ever increasingly thankful for people like Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, who are willing to call a spade a spade. You know, that's what I needed. But, and when I say it's your fault, I'm not saying it to, because obviously I don't really mean it. It was my responsibility. But I say it somewhat in jest to say, in your good intentions, to not defame something that you weren't participating in. Many of you unwittingly upheld ideas that simply weren't true. And you did it out of respect. I don't want to say that enough people say this gives them hope, so it must be true. No, that's not how we establish what true is. Let's actually find out if it gives people hope. Let's actually find out if it helps people get off of drugs. Well, I heard a lot of people say it helps them get off of drugs. Yes, I've helped a lot of those people get off of drugs. They're still on drugs. They just say they're not on drugs. That's typically how that works. People lie. If anybody should know that, atheists should know that. And then you should definitely know that people who have an imaginary friend are definitely going to lie. They're going to lie to support their imaginary friend. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a very good friendship. Okay, I'm being a little facetious, but you get it. So, how does this lead to wasted lives? I'd say study the persistent disappointment of the believer outside of the community high of Sunday morning. Okay? Go to any church leadership conference. I kid you not. Sign up for any church leadership conference where they're having like the breakout sessions and go see what those topics are. Study the repeated prayer requests that never get answered. Study the sermons of the most effective churches in our communities, and you will find a consistent stream of trauma bonding with Jesus. And for those of you who ask for sources, I'm not going to give you some sources, but I'm going to give you some breadcrumbs that you can find. I literally just went through a few preachers that I know who have churches that are doing very well. Some of these are people that I used to work with, just to see what some of the titles of their most recent sermons were within the past 3 or 4 months. Let me give you some of these titles and see if you can pick up a trend. I Got Away. It's barely making it. Don't Leave Me Down, which means I'm down. Let It Go, which means time to get over it. It's Not Over Yet. You haven't lost. I Won't Go Out Like This. You haven't lost. Triumph Wrapped in Trauma. I mean, the word trauma is literally there. What God Can Do with the Damage. How to Worship with a Hole in Your Heart. It's About to Get Better. A Supernatural Strategy Called Hope. Handling Heartbreak. Surviving Strongholds. Surviving the Storms. An Uphill Battle. I Won't Die in This Den. Better Days Are Ahead. Surviving Difficult Times. Okay? Are you seeing a trend? I pulled this from several different pastors who pastor several different types of churches, all Black. That's what I aimed for. If you don't believe me, type any of those titles in YouTube and just add sermon after it. You're likely not going to pull up the same pastors I found, because that's how prevalent these type of messages are in the Black community. That's how prevalent this type of messaging is in the Black community, now in the Black churches. Now, I'm not trying to say that there isn't space for this type of messaging. Yes, people do go through hard times and they need incredibly inspirational, motivational messages. But let's kind of think about this. When we look at this, we can clearly see from the messaging that the pastors see themselves as the facilitators of trauma treatment, right? We often call the church a hospital. And that once people get well, then they should be able to remove themselves from the treatment without pressure. But that's not what happens in this hospital, is it? After you have responded to the messaging of the trauma bond and perhaps feel that you're well enough to no longer need the treatment, you are told that you will always need treatment, and then the people are committed to showing you all the ways that you and everybody you know are tragically flawed in true Ray Comfort style, with no hope of personal redemption, only the redemption offered by their personal brand of Jesus. Imagine if that's how hospitals worked, where you went in to get help, and then you were told that you could never be helped, and that you'd have to come back every week because I think I just described dependency. Okay. Any church that is growing where this is the main message, we should watch with close eyes in the same way we'd watch any medical facility doing the same thing. If this is really supposed to be helpful, then we should be mindful of when it is harmful. And I don't think I have to say much more to demonstrate just how harmful this is. You're inculcating people to this idea that they are trapped in a constant cycle of trauma, and that's just the natural state of life, that this is this is the way that God wants them to be, and it's to keep them dependent on God. You know, I need you to stay sick so I can keep healing you. Like in the Black church, we literally tell people you have to come here to stay sane. If you don't come to church, you might slip up and kill somebody. This is horrible, especially when this is the messaging. Some of my former contemporaries are some of the most brilliant communicators on this planet, and many of them go out of their way to integrate truly helpful information into their sermons. But because of their shared belief, they do not have the necessary capacity to interrogate the impacts of the leaven on the lump. Which, in other words, they don't realize how, yes, you can do a series about financial management, financial responsibility, a series about entrepreneurship, series about healthier relationships. But then when you combine those messages with don't you try to figure it out, and God is an on-time God, and don't get in God's way, and maybe God wants to do something different, then you put yourself in a situation where you cannot. My phone is ringing. Sorry about that. You put yourself in a situation where you put the people in a situation, rather, where they can't actually figure out what they're supposed to be doing. Am I supposed to be taking the advice you just gave me in this series, or am I supposed to be not trying to figure it out? You trap the people in that way. When I was in the faith, we had a saying amongst Black churches in urban settings, and that was we were putting the cookies on the bottom shelf so Pookie could get them, and then we'd raise them up from there. And the idea was we were preaching things in a way that everybody could understand it. At least that's what we were saying. It turns out we were just preaching fluff, you know. But I now realize how patronizing that is. That means you take the default position that someone who is not like you can't understand you. And so that you need to treat them like children. Because I realize how patronizing that is, it's one of the things that I am absolutely resistant to regressing to. Instead of putting anything on the bottom shelf, I'm here to help people learn how to reach, you know? So when it comes to holding the Black church accountable, how do we do it? We call a spade a spade. We call out harmful practices. We refuse to accept anecdotal testimony as evidence of something being helpful. We start being genuine about the things that we say. You know, secular community, if you don't know about the church, please don't feel pressured to say it's working for people unless you have evidence of people that it's working for. Because in most cases, as a person who's been in ministry for over 20 years, I can tell you that it's not working for people. The sociological environment enables and damn near forces people to pretend like it's working to save face. You have to understand that to say that it's not working would be offensive for a believer. So a believer who is true in their faith, even when it's not working, they can't say the words "it's not working" without feeling convicted that they are somehow not trusting God. You know? And even if the people in church do not yet have the capacity to see how harmful this is, we should not be okay with overlooking it. And I think I'll close out my little my little speech, my sermonette here. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope I said something that sparked some conversation wherever you are in your mind, with your families, with your friends. I hope this brings some clarity to some things, and I hope it gives you a little bit more insight into me. I am fiercely passionate about the Black community, just as I am passionate about people all over this globe. As a matter of fact, you can give the Black community, you can thank the Black community for me being a humanist. You can thank them for that. I learned how to love the rest of the world by learning how to love my community. I learned how to care for the rest of the world by learning how to care for my community. It's the truest, it's it's a more true example of love your neighbor as you love yourself than Jesus ever meant or exemplified. And that was just getting to the place of realizing that what I want for my children, I would not want to rob anybody else's children of. That's how I became a humanist. That's how my journey went. I didn't start as a humanist, as an atheist. Atheist. Um, I immediately went Black nationalist. Immediately, like and then just kind of spread out a little bit, where I felt like Black nationalism was a little limited in scope. Still has its place in the way that any form of nationalism does, or any form of nationhood does, really has its place, but it's restricted in its scope in the same way that being an American, if I'm an American president, it's nice, it's needed, but it's limited in its scope of concern. And so Black nationalism for me, very much still important for me. I do, speculatively, I would have preferred a history of where the civil rights, not civil rights, but where the Emancipation Proclamation would not have been necessary. A history where we would have organized ourselves into our own nation and moved on from there. I personally think that would have led to healthier interactions all the way across, but only in so much as if we would have been willing to defend our nationhood. So, in the same way that the early colonists went through the same thing with the British. They decided, what, I think we're going to separate and do our own thing, and maybe we'll have better relations later on. So, but it was through that, and through that deep connection with wanting to figure out how I could be of great use, and of great value to my community, that I committed my mind, my time, and my research, to study, to projects and to programs, with that limited scope. And then the more I was involved in that, my scope expanded to Pan-Africanism, because then I began to realize that it wasn't just Black people in the United States that were having issues. First it was realizing that, being a part of the larger diaspora, and that, my story is bigger than just the slaves or the Africans who were transported from West Africa to, the East Coast of North America. It also includes the Africans who were taken to the Central American islands, and some of the Black people who can argumentatively be African or not, definitely Black. There were Black people already there, part of which my family line comes from the Central American islands. But then also the Africans who were moved to South America, but then also the Africans who were moved around on the continent, but then also the Africans who, or this makes some people mad, but also the Melanesians and Micronesians who traveled from the Polynesian islands to South America, transplanting. I don't want to get into a whole big history lesson here, but a deep passion for learning and studying that history and realizing how important that history was just for people, period, expanded my ideology so much so where I just didn't want to operate in a limited scope. And so though my scope now is all humanity, there's nothing you can do that can rob me of my passion for the Black community. And I will always do my best to speak truth to power and create space for change. Okay, now I'm done. I've said enough. Thank y'all for hanging out with me. I love y'all so much. Y'all have a wonderful day. Until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and if you can, stay beautiful. I'll holla at you.